Gosh, Tom's got his leather jacket.
Oh man.
You can't.
Yeah, he's looking extra tall today.
Yeah, you can throw lightning bolts at Tom Ross, but they're just going to bounce off that jacket.
It looks like Tom has the play for this game.
Wow.
So it looks like he won the first game, lost the second game, and now they're in game 3, and he's going to lead fetching for a Forest off of his Windswept Heath to a Noble Hierarch, and then just pass over to Josh Mays.
So a pretty ideal start for Tom. And again, we've been seeing this all through this tournament, is decks are trying to find little ways to get ahead on mana and then leveraging that to a victory in the next, couple turns. Basically, Josh is able to get onto the board, but Tom is going to be able to get onto the board in a bigger way just because he has more mana.
So Josh is just going to lead on a Stomping Grounds into a Goblin Guide and attack for 2. But the bad news is it revealed a Become Immense on top of Tom's deck. So that is something that Josh is going to have to be wary of now the rest of the game.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that's interesting about Goblin Guide in these sort of matches is because the games are so fast, you may give your opponent some extra lands, but the burn deck is trying to play a game where you don't even have enough time to play those extra lands. And so when they get the extra land, maybe it's not that big of a deal, but the extra information is really, really valuable.
Absolutely. So it looks like Tom is just going to play an Inkmoth Nexus, crash in for 1 off the Exalted trigger of that Noble Hierarch. Josh is just going to go ahead and lay Scalding Tarn, cast another Goblin Guide, crash them into the red zone. Both triggers are going to reveal a Spell Pierce, which is not really going to do much at this particular moment.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the better starts for Josh. I mean, he was on the draw, but because he has haste creatures, he's kind of able to steal a little bit of that initiative back from Tom, despite Tom having a Noble Hierarch on turn 1, which is putting his mana even farther ahead.
Also, Tom didn't deploy an Infect creature last turn. Even though he does have an Inkmoth Nexus, that is something that Josh does have to be aware of. Tom's going to have to sink some mana into actually getting this Infect creature going, which could give Josh the time needed to burn the game out. So Tom's just going to fire up that Inkmoth Nexus, send it into the red zone. It's going to get the Exalted trigger from the Noble Hierarch and do 2 Infect damage to Josh Mays. He's going to use his fetch land, crack it for a Sacred Foundry, and I imagine that signifies that he might have some number of Boros Charm or Lightning Helix in his hand.
Yeah, this is one matchup where you're really going to watch the life totals. A lot of times it's about positioning or card advantage or control over the board. Control over the board is going to be somewhat relevant, but because each player essentially has a lot of spells that can go directly to their opponent's face, the life totals are going to be really, really important. So that's something you want to keep an eye on in this match.
Absolutely. So Josh is going to go ahead and use his Arid Mesa. Just from glancing at his hand as he was fanning through it, it looks like he does have a Monastery Swift Spear, but he also has an Atarkus Command. So looking at it, he can actually do 12 points of damage to Tom this turn if Tom doesn't block. If he decides to try and go all in. But he does have to remember, Tom has that Spell Pierce that he got off of the Goblin Guides that he can cast off that Noble Hierarch.
Yeah, and Josh knows that the Become Immense is a huge threat. So Josh, he wants to get as much damage in as he can, but we can see here that he's playing things a little bit more conservatively, respecting the fact that Tom can just kill Josh.
Absolutely. Plus, it also looks like he has some number of Boros Charms in his hand, so he does have quite a bit of burn that he's going to be able to try and use here.
Yeah, and that's always the situation that you want to be in, is if you're going to hold your mana open in order to play around something on your opponent, you always want to have something to do and some way to use your mana in case they don't do the thing that you expect them to do.
Absolutely. Now, Tom was able to get a land off of one of the Goblin Guide triggers. And it looks like he's just going to use a Vines of the Vastwood on Josh's end step.
Powering up that delve.
Just trying to power up that delve.
Yeah. Yeah, Tom is one of the only people that I see make plays like that. I mean, he is just so calculating, and he just knows all the ins and outs. He's just such a good player to watch for these scenarios, because in a game where it's likely only going to be 4 or 5 turns, you really got to make every single turn count. And I mean, he has limited information. Tom doesn't know exactly how this game's going to play out. He knows that he's probably pretty close to dead. He may only have one more turn, and he just knows that he's a little bottlenecked on mana, and firing off that Vines of the Vastwood, even if it's for no value, is just his only way to power up his delve.
So it looks like here he has shocked himself on that breeding pool and deployed the Necropede that was revealed off of the Goblin Guides. So at this point, he's just trying to survive a turn and get to a point where he can use his Become Immense on that Inkmoth Nexus and win the game. But Josh is going to go ahead and fire a Lightning Bolt on Tom's end step. I have to imagine this is going up top.
Yeah, I agree. Tom has his Spell Pierce, so he's probably considering if he wants to use it here. Tom's life total is really, really, really low, and he's worried about this quite a bit.
Yeah, and Josh with this Atarka's Command and Boros Charm in his hand, even if Tom uses the Spell Pierce to stop this Lightning Bolt, he's at risk of just dying next turn.
Yeah, and this is really showcasing the power of the burn deck. I mean, Tom, he had a turn 1 Hierarch. He had a lot of, a lot of mana, but he wasn't actually able to use that mana on turn 2.
Yeah, unfortunately he didn't have an Infect creature to deploy, only an Inkmoth Nexus, which again, it felt like he's just been 1 mana off this entire game.
Yeah, I mean, Josh managed to use he hit all of his land drops and used all of his mana on every single turn, whereas Tom, he missed using all of his mana on 1 turn. So, I mean, if you just look at the game in the sense of who used their mana more efficiently and had more of it, even though Tom had that Noble Hierarch, Josh was actually the one who had more mana and more effective mana, essentially.
Absolutely. So it looks like Josh has gone ahead and sent all of his creatures into the red zone. Tom's in the tank trying to figure out how he can get out of this. He is going to be able to block 2 creatures, but he's basically going to be dead to almost any spell.
Yeah, Tom's in a tough spot, and he knows he knows it. Leather Jacket just wasn't quite good enough this game.
He didn't put enough shine on it this morning.
Yeah. And this is basically it. Even if Tom Spell Pierces the Boros Charm, the Prowess trigger on the Swift Spear, and the Goblin Guide still take him down.
So it looks like we've got a Nature's Claim targeting his own Necropede, which is something that's real sweet for these Infect decks to be able to try and gain some life. But Josh does have a fetch land that he's going to use there, and I imagine he's going to try and cast his Atarka's Command, which is going to get hit more than likely with that Spell Pierce.
Yeah, so Tom has actually played this really, really well. It looks like he may have bought himself another draw step.
And a bunch more cards in his graveyard for Become Immense.
Yeah. Wow, if Tom gets this game, that would be unreal. So it looks like he's going to survive this attack step. And his Necropede dies before combat damage is dealt, so the -1/-1 counter goes on the Swift Spear before the Swift Spear deals damage.
I wonder what mode did he choose on the Boros Charm that's resolving. I don't know if it's 4 damage or if it's double strike targeting the Swift Spear.
If it's 4 damage, it seems like Tom might just be dead anyway. So we'll have to see how the players are going to resolve this situation.
If it's double strike, I guess it was 4 damage.
Yep. Well, Tom still had a pretty sweet line of play to try to wiggle his way out of that situation, but...
A very Tom Ross line of play.
Yeah, but I mean, Josh just had a bunch of hyper-efficient cards. He hit a land drop every single turn. I think on turn 2, he played his second Goblin Guide, and there was 1 mana that he didn't use. But Josh, overall in a game where both players are just trying to be really, really aggressive, the player who uses their mana more efficiently is usually going to come out ahead, and we saw that happen to Josh.
What's really interesting here is we see something similar to what Todd Anderson did yesterday with the Dismember on his own Dryad Arbor to try and power up his Become Immense. Tom was just trying to use